I once worked as a direct care aide for a 65-year-old woman with a developmental disability. Her daughter, who was in her 40s, worked overnight shifts and needed someone with medical experience to watch her mother through the night. When I say I once worked for them, I mean I literally worked there exactly one time, just that single night, and what you're about to hear is exactly why I never went back. The 65-year-old woman's name was Martha. Her daughter, who had reached out to hire me, was named Colleen. It's possible Colleen didn't have other family available to help and either didn't want to or couldn't afford to place Martha in a nursing home. It's also possible she simply felt more comfortable bringing in someone with a professional background. At the time, I was already working as a direct care worker for 2 other women with developmental disabilities, so I had solid experience going in. But nothing I had done before could have prepared me for that night. Colleen left for work earlier that evening. I had already put in a full shift at my other job beforehand, so I was running on fumes and really pushing my body to its limit, trying to earn as much as I could. Before she left, Colleen had introduced me to Martha, who gave me a smile before Colleen brought her upstairs to her bedroom for the night. It was around 9 in the evening. Colleen mentioned that Martha would sometimes wander around the house at night in a confused state, and that I would need to calm her down and guide her back to her room. She made a point of telling me this was not sleepwalking. When I asked what it was, she said it was a symptom of her mother's dementia. I told her not to worry, and that I knew how to handle it, that I spent the first stretch of the evening in the living room, catching up on a show I'd been watching. These jobs aren't exactly glamorous, and a lot of the time it really is just sitting around waiting. At some point I heard footsteps from upstairs. I went to the stairway, looked up, and called Martha's name asking if she needed anything. She didn't answer. I heard her footsteps move back toward her room, and then her door closed. I figured she had probably gotten up to use the bathroom. I went back to the living room and kept watching TV. About an hour later I got up to grab the sandwich I had brought and left in the fridge. As I walked out of the kitchen with my plate, I nearly had a heart attack and dropped everything when I found Martha standing right there in the doorway. The plate shattered on the floor. I immediately apologized and asked if she was okay. She started yelling at me, demanding to know who I was. I reminded her of who I was and why I was there. Everything she said at that point came out as a scream. "Why are you here? I don't know you." Things along those lines. I calmly reminded her that we had just met earlier that evening and that her daughter Colleen had hired me to look after her and the house. That seemed to get through to her just enough for me to coax her back upstairs and into her room. I brought her up a glass of water and some melatonin, made sure she took both, and then headed back downstairs. That a few hours later I was completely wiped out. I absolutely had to get at least a couple of hours of sleep. Colleen had mentioned there was a spare bedroom upstairs with a twin bed that I was welcome to use if I needed to rest. At that point Martha seemed like she was out for the night from the melatonin, so I went up and was asleep within minutes. But I only got about an hour before something woke me up. That it was a repetitive slamming sound coming from downstairs, happening every 1 to 2 seconds without stopping. I jumped out of bed immediately. I had left the bedroom door open specifically, so I would hear anything if Martha got up, and sure enough, that was exactly what was happening. When I reached the top of the stairs, I could tell the slamming was coming from the kitchen. I moved down the stairs as quickly as I could while staying quiet. When I got to the bottom, I peered around the corner into the kitchen, and what I saw looked like something right out of a horror movie. Martha was standing in the darkness in front of the oven, repeatedly pulling it open and slamming it shut over and over again. When I say I saw Martha, I really only saw her silhouette because it was that dark in there. I called her name loudly and she stopped, turned toward me, shut the oven door one final time, and started walking in my direction toward the stairs. I asked in a much softer and admittedly somewhat shaky voice if she was okay. As she got close enough for me to make out her face, she looked at me with a completely blank expression, walked right past me, and started heading up the stairs. I followed her up, but the moment she reached her room, she slammed the door shut. I knocked and asked if she was all right. No response. I quietly opened the door just enough to peek inside, and I found Martha standing at the side of her bed, completely still, facing the wall. That I have seen a lot of things in this line of work, but that was genuinely unsettling in a way that felt like something straight out of a scary movie. As I said, I walked over to her and gently eased her into the bed. Once she was lying down, I pulled the covers over her, said goodnight, and closed her door. I went across the hall to the spare room and got back into bed. I deliberately tried to stay awake for at least another 30 minutes, just in case she stirred again, But I honestly don't know if I even lasted that long before I was out cold that I woke up again sometime later. The room was still pitch black, and the 1-hour alarm I had set had not gone off yet. I looked around the room trying to figure out what had pulled me out of sleep. Then I heard a sound coming from inside the closet. That's when I noticed the closet door was slightly ajar, and there was the dark silhouette of a head peeking out through the gap. I nearly had a second heart attack in one night. I said Martha's name. No answer. I kept repeating it until she pushed the door open and started slowly moving toward the bed. She began saying the same things she had said hours earlier. "Who are you? I don't know you." As she got closer, I tried to stay calm and remind her of who I was. I reached over for the lamp on the nightstand and fumbled with it until it clicked on. Martha was holding a large kitchen knife. Everything changed in that instant. Martha was no longer just a confused patient. She was a direct threat to my life, and my only priority was getting myself out of that room safely. I screamed at her to put the knife down. My scream seemed to agitate her further because she stepped closer and started screaming back at me, still repeating that she didn't know who I was. I was not about to try to reason with a dementia patient holding a knife. I mapped out the quickest path around her and went for it. I launched off the far side of the bed and bolted for the door. She screamed again as I ran past her and took a slow, weak swipe at the air with the knife. It wasn't a powerful swing, but it was clear enough that she had every intention of using it that I got downstairs, grabbed my shoes, and went outside. Rather than calling 911, I called Colleen, as she had specifically asked me to do if any issues came up. I did that out of courtesy to her, because getting law enforcement involved rarely makes things easier for anyone. Colleen was yelling at me over the phone, telling me not to leave. I yelled back that her mother had just tried to come at me with a knife, and that I had done her the favor of not calling the police. She had no choice but to leave work and come home. I stayed outside the house the entire time to make sure Martha didn't go anywhere until Colleen arrived. When Colleen went inside, Martha was back in her bed, asleep. Colleen actually went as far as accusing me of blowing the whole thing out of proportion, right up until she found the knife sitting next to Martha's bed. I made the decision not to mention that I had gone to sleep at any point during the night, though I want to be clear that I don't believe I did anything wrong. Colleen herself had offered me that room to use. I never set foot in that house again. In 9 years of working as a direct care aide, Martha was the most frightening patient I had ever encountered.